in the beginning, and NAFCM, one of the other driving points in bringing people together, as I said earlier, that was on the agenda of the National Institute for Dispute Resolution. And that was to bring together the multiple voices within community mediation and program to talk about one unified set of policies, procedures, and a voice that could talk about and promote the field. So when you talk about community mediation, regardless of where you were speaking about it meant the same thing. Because as I said, some, when you look at it, was a community mediation center, but you did juvenile programming. Had one, if you talked about it, it was doing, court-annexed mediation. You talked about it was doing community kind of public policy issues. So were they all community mediation centers? And say, yes, we were, because we held in common those hallmarks and said, this is what distinguishes us. This is what makes us community mediation center, so that we can have one voice that says we do many things in community mediation, but we're all community mediation centers. And this is what community mediation is all about. If you do A, B, C, D, then you're a community mediation center, regardless of which venue and arena you provide that services in. You are a community mediation center. So that became the voice of community mediation. That's what people realized, and those were the various organizations, the centers that came together and said, yeah, we are more alike and we're different. Yes, we are a community mediation center. Yeah, so I'm a public policy mediation center. You're a community mediation center. So that was really helpful. But again, going back, and because without NIDA, we would have continued to do our own thing and our respective areas. It's what we were doing was working in our communities, but it also limited us in terms of going after as federal dollars and national dollars became available. But you were one, you're the only voice that was saying, this is what community mediation is all about. If you remember, we had several meetings with the CERDNA Foundation back in the day. And that was helpful because they said, we want to do pilot programs. We work with CERDNA, NAFCM, and identify like 4 pilot programs that we do around the country. But as opposed to contracting with the individual centers, we said, this is why we need an association. Let's work through NAFCM. Let's identify those centers around the country. And that was one of our early programs that we collaborated on to bring funding into NAFCM as an association, so that we could continue to talk about in terms of where we have like functions, training, and so forth, and where we differ on it, but we understand the difference, and we can quantify that. It works on this program, but we're going to do this. And if you do a program, okay, I think we also got into human rights cases and programs, but we talked about it as an association in terms of what would be the hallmarks of those programs. Some programs and projects were providing pro bono work. And as we talk about it, there's a value so that whoever's contract or whoever's asking for the work, contract for the work, and that would begin to generate income. One of our struggles in the early days was so that the members were not competing with NAFCM for income, because there's a reality with the association is that you need the resources to operate the association. So we needed to bring in contracts because, as I said, NAFCM was reaching, not NAFCM, but NIDA, was reaching its sunset. So it was going to go away. So the initial cost in bringing us together was covered through NIDA and a grant that they had secured. I think it was from the MacArthur Foundation or something like that, that got us started so that we were able to meet, we were able to pull together in terms of researching our similarities, our differences, and so forth, bringing us together, looking at the research that others had done and identifying. And that's what we had in the early days. More people identified who we were than we did ourselves. So, and everyone's writing about this is what's happening in community mediation. And they're talking about the growth and the blossoming of the field, but that wasn't our voice. That was others writing about us and said, we should be doing that. We should tell our own story. And that's when we secured the funding, we hired staff so that we can begin to tell our story. Yeah. You know, I thought on it. NAFCM is based upon human interaction. That we believe that if you bring people together, people have the opportunity to talk, even though they may come in with issues and disagreement. The chances of them working through that when they come together are much greater than if they don't continue to talk to each other, and if they decide that the route they want to resolve their case is through courts. Courts will give them a decision on the problem, but it doesn't do anything to strengthen, repair, hurt, harm, and build relationships. When you have people that have gone through our traditional criminal justice system, and when you tell them about the advantages and the benefits of what we value and the hallmarks of mediation and NAFCM, people will buy into them. And I'll tell one story that I had I was looking for funding for a victim offender mediation program. I contacted an insurance company. And I was fortunate enough to get an interview with the person they sent out to do the interview. After we talked for a while, realized he had been through a criminal justice system. He had been a victim of a crime. And the things that we were talking about in terms of the healing process that you need to go through, that you need to, somebody needs to be held accountable directly to you, you know, as the victim. The state takes on it and battle, but once the state is satisfied, so the victim must be satisfied, and that's not always the case. And as we're talking about it, this guy, like I said, has been a victim of a crime. He talked about the cycle that he went through and the stages of victimization and what that felt like. And what he missed most was that not having a victim impact statement is that to talk to the individual without getting a response and feeling that they owe you some explanation, it's like talking to a wall. And he said just the opportunity he felt to ask that person, why did you do it? So that would have meant so much more to him than what he went through. But the long and short of the story is he went back and recommended that program based upon what he felt he would have wanted and going through the criminal justice system. I think that's the value in NAFCM, because you still have a diversity of programs, organizations, and agencies that brings different applications to the core principles of mediation. The core principles of it is that you got to value the opportunity for people to engage in the process. Value the opportunity for people to work on the relationship, to hold somebody accountable, to be able to ask them a question. If that question is why did you do it? And sometimes it's, so what did I do to you? That's tremendous, because the system does not allow that for people. I talk with people that have gone through the mediation, and sometimes because the process itself, although it's not therapy, it's therapeutic in terms of mending and rebuilding relationships. And very often, the people we're dealing with are not strangers. People coming in, they're coming into our court system. It's not a bad chance. These are neighbors. These are people that live in the same neighborhood. Right? And if you go in there and they'll say, okay, look, one of you need to move. Well, you know, they're not going to move. So what do? You're trying to work on it. Help them to work on building that, identifying what caused it. Now, what do you want to do about it? Assisting them in that. That's why NAFCM is still here. That's why many of the community mediation centers, if they've evolved with the time and address the current needs within their community, they're still here. They're still providing services.